Good evening, fathers and brothers. The gospel we will be reflecting on tonight is Mark chapter 7, verse 45 and following. Mark chapter 7, verse 45 and following.
And he made his disciples get into a boat and proceed him to the other side toward Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And when he had taken leave of them, he went off to the mountain to pray. When it was evening, the boat was far out on the sea, and he was alone on the shore. Then he saw that they were tossed about while rowing, for the wind was against them. About the fourth watch of the night, he came toward them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. They had all seen him and were terrified. But at once he spoke with them. "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." He got into the boat, and with them the wind died down. They were completely astounded. So, the apostles, they have a problem. They're on the sea, and around them, a great storm is whipping around them. Yet, what is this storm? For the sailors, the fishermen, they're afraid, they're cowering. Well, to understand the storm, we must understand the Sea of Galilee. Around the Sea of Galilee, there is a range of hills. And through these hills, a little valley cuts them in half. And if a wind current goes through this valley in just the right way, it creates a sudden and violent storm. And so this is what the apostles are experiencing. And since they believe in God, they believe in Jesus, or at least they're on that path, they turn to God in this moment, and they ask God, "God, help us. Help us. We are perishing in the storm. It is too much for us." And yet, the storm keeps getting stronger. And the apostles are left feeling abandoned by God, and feel abandoned to the whims of nature. And I had a similar experience to this. I was 12 years old. I was in 6th grade, and it was on February 2nd, 2014. My favorite team, the Denver Broncos, we made it to the Super Bowl, which is the championship for football. And so my family, we threw a huge party for the Broncos. We were all wearing jerseys and Denver Bronco shirts, and we had hamburgers and hot dogs and nachos and all that great food. And yet there's just one problem. At halftime, my team was losing. The Broncos were losing, and they were losing bad. So I knew that this was pretty desperate. So I decided to do as the apostles did, to turn to God, to pray. And so I prayed to God something like this, like, "God, if you love me, You'll let my Denver Broncos win. And so the Broncos won, right? No, they didn't win. They got utterly destroyed. It was terrible. And so I was left feeling devastated, and I was bitterly disappointed, even a little depressed that this team that I was following, the team that I was following my whole life, especially this year, all the way to the Super Bowl, they let me down. And I was also a little bit ashamed because I had a friend in my class who was cheering for the other team. And the whole year before this, we were going back and forth on whose team was the best. And the next day was Monday, so I was going to have to face a pretty hard reality check. And I even ended up feeling a little bit angry at God, because in the midst of this storm, I didn't really know where God was. And so, going back to the apostle story, because it didn't end there. So the storm is getting worse. The wind is becoming even more fierce. The rain is falling even harder. And right when you think, they've reached the end of their strength rowing, it's the middle of the night, they have no sleep. Things can't get worse. And yet, a ghost appears and starts walking towards them. And they've just lost it. They're utterly terrified. They're sleep deprived. They've lost everything. They have no idea what's going to happen. And it is precisely in this moment that God comes, that Jesus comes walking on the water. And he says, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." And so in the midst of the confusion, of the fear, God breaks forth, and there is peace when the apostles needed it the most. My story also did not end on that night. 2 years later, I was in 8th grade. I was about 14 years old. On my team, the Denver Broncos, we made it to the playoffs again, but things were not looking as good as they did 2 years ago because our star player was injured for half the season, and we weren't scoring as many points. And so I felt that I had to help my Denver Broncos. So I decided to pray again. But this time my prayer was a little bit different. I decided to pray, "Lord, I know you're all powerful, and I know that if you want, my Denver Broncos can win. But I'm going to leave it up to you. If they win, great. If not, also great. I abandon it all to you." And so, the first game happens. They win. They win their first playoff game. So I'm like, okay, great. Then the second game happens, and they win again. And this win brings them to the Super Bowl. Again, the football championship. And so, at this time, I'm already in the minor seminary, in the high school seminary at Sacred Heart. And so, we also throw a Super Bowl party, because the apostolic school is just one big party. And so, my family and my friends, they're not obviously present here for this Super Bowl. And most of the kids are cheering for the other team, the Panthers. And there were even 2 kids from North Carolina, which is where the Panthers are. So And also, the professionals were predicting that the other team, the Panthers, were going to win. So things weren't looking as good. But when the game started, I was tense this whole game, wondering if God was going to pull through or if the Broncos were going to win. And guess what? The Broncos won. They won the Super Bowl. And so obviously I was overjoyed. I was so happy because obviously they won. But something even more important, it was one of the first times I believe that I experienced God's personal love for me in my whole life. At least in this strong of a way. Because, I love the Denver Broncos. And yet God showed me so much more love than I could ever show for the Broncos or for anyone. And that's part of the reason why I'm here today, because I want to share that joy. I want to share that love with everybody, with everyone that I meet, especially if God is calling me to do it as a priest. And so to conclude, the one main lesson I learned from this is that God always answers our prayers. He doesn't answer it maybe how we want him to, or when we want him to, but God is faithful, and he always answers our prayers.